Good morning.
Good morning, folks.
So welcome to SDS Thursday.
I even recognize some faces from the last week or two I've been working with.
Oh, excellent.
See you here.
Yes,
Hi there, David. Hi there, Terry. Good to see you.
Yes, it's 12 o'clock. People are still coming, and but we will start as promised at 12. Welcome to SDS Thursday. It is brought to you by SDS Seminars. We are a UK-based company, and we've been running this Thursdays since 2020. So we are quickly approaching our 3rd anniversary of SDS Thursdays, but our company is approaching 33rd anniversary of SDS Seminars. So we've been around for quite a while, and it's good to see some of the people who we've met before at our courses, and very good to see some new faces. You've probably noticed usually SDS Thursdays coming out in the evenings, but today we've decided to do it at midday, simply because lots of people contacted us and said that they can't make evenings. So we've decided to add a little bit of variety for those who can only join us during the day, and run SDS Thursday today at midday. I will ask you to start typing and let us know a little bit about yourselves. Whereabout are you based? Where are you in the world? What is your professional background status? Are you working in private practice or in the NHS? Maybe you're working in education sector. Whatever is relevant. Obviously, today's topic is depression, so we'll be very interested whether you are working with clients with depression and whether they're adult clients or young people with depression, and how often you come across it. If you are here for the first time, please mention that it's your first SDS Thursday and let us know how did you hear about us. Obviously, you've all received our email to be invited to this session, but prior to that, how did you hear about SDS Thursdays, how you've decided to sign up for them? If you're watching us on YouTube, because all our SDS Thursdays are absolutely free and available on YouTube at our channel. If you're watching us on YouTube, we'll be also very grateful if you mention these things in the comments under the video and let us know where are you watching it from and how did you discover us, and what is your professional background and setting. And of course, on YouTube, if you put a little like, that will help other people to discover our video and watch it as well. Let me introduce us. So my name is Dr. Julia Budnik, and I'm a co-director of SDS Seminars. And my other co-director is Paul Grantham, who will be your host for today. And we are talking today about the course about working with depression. And although Paul has been delivering this course for quite a few years, this course will be different. He'll be delivering it on the 28th of February and 1st of March. And it is a completely redone, rebranded course, because in the past, working with depression was a one-day course. Now it is a 2-day course. And it will include all sorts of updates because, believe it or not, things are changing in the field of working with depression. So Paul completely updated the course and also included in it certain things which are, I would call, probably myths about depression and how to demystify them and find the correct answers to some of the common questions of working with depression. Now, very happily, I'll pass the microphone to Paul to take you on today's journey. Please, Paul.
Thanks very much, Julia. Welcome, folks. Just to give a little bit of a context to what I'm going to be talking about today, it is obviously something which is going to be about emphasizing the highlights of the course that I'm going to be running on the 28th of Feb and the 1st of March. It's a 2-day course. I think the other thing just to mention about this is that not only is it substantially updated, it's the first time in a while that it's actually being run live rather than actually as a recording, and that obviously accommodates the updates that have been alluded to. If you're not aware of it, it is also part of a Master Practitioner Diploma in CBT, which we run, which is a large course. I think probably what's fair to say is it's a plus if you've got some background in CBT in terms of coming along to this particular module. We have got an introductory course if you need the basics, but in addition to that, we can usually do some degree of catch up on the actual day. So if you're not totally familiar with a lot of the concepts, we will try and help you to do that. One of the things that has led me certainly to want to move this to a 2-day course is that, well, two things really, I think. Partly it's about the fact that depression is such a common issue that individuals actually come along with, or which we feel that we get in referral letters or confronted by. And so to some extent, it's sort of, I think, become a familiar background to the work that many of us actually do. And I think it deserves a fresh look, really. I think that's one of the particular reasons. And the other thing is because it is such a common issue, I just wanted to have some training which will provide far more opportunities really for practice of techniques and getting some feedback on it and so on and so forth. And we'll certainly have a lot more opportunities for actually doing that on the 2-day course. What I wanted to do, as I say, was just to highlight some of the key things that I'm going to be going through during the course. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to share my screen, which on the basis of past experience should not be a problem, unlike Julia's. Let's just take it back there. There we go. To just take you through issues which we're going to be looking at, raising, I think, some issues of controversy and highlighting some of the new developments that I think are worth particularly looking at and having a better understanding of in this particular field. So I wanted to start off really with an issue which I suspect, well, I know in fact is going to be pretty controversial, but it's one that is actually close to my heart, really. And I'll say a little bit about it now, but it's something that will be opening up in a lot more detail during the actual course. And I know it looks like a slightly weird question to ask, which is depression really depression? But let me just take you through why I'm actually raising that, which actually has to do with what's called the depression epidemic. So we have identified that basically it is, and this is not just me that's saying this, is the World Health Organization, is that it's the largest course of what are called DALYs, which are basically to do with quality of life and its negative impact. Second most biggest impact across the world in 2020 in terms of interfering with quality of life. Prevalence rates have increased substantially over the last 50 to 60 years. I've got some data here from Kraus, which is a bit old now, but which covers basically that that sort of period with a massive increase. I mean, we'll come back to this massive increase in a minute, but an absolutely massive increase over a 50-year period of 5,000 to 10,000%. The number of new cases per year that are currently coming on stream, staggering number of 1.8 million. I'll just repeat that, 1.8 million. This is phenomenally high. Between 5 and 10% of the UK population are deemed to be suffering from depression at any one point in time at the moment. There is some degree of variation in these figures, as you can see, but I hope you can appreciate that whether you take the bottom end or the top end of the figures, this is a huge proportion of the population. And then when you go into certain subgroups, particularly socially excluded subgroups, the numbers escalate enormously. Around about a third of UK asylum seekers and nearly 2/3 of people who are homeless without a roof. Depression has been estimated this year by Mind to be affecting 11% of the population. So there's an even higher percentage here than this. And just so you know what sort of implications this has got, you have 71 million antidepressant medications that were prescribed in 2018 alone. Let me just repeat that. 71 million antidepressant medications prescribed, and that the latest figures that we're now getting through post-COVID suggest a further increase in those figures of 24%. So just so you're clear on this, this is basically more than one prescription per member of the population. Phenomenally large figures that we're talking about here. Now, I have always been very struck by these figures because for a variety of reasons, I will be honest with you, I have found myself feeling slightly skeptical about it. And I want to go through a little bit about why I'm skeptical about treating it in this particular way. So what I thought was useful to do was to compare it to other data that we've actually got from other commonly recognized current epidemic problems that exist within the UK. So on the basis of this, have we really had a 10,000% increase over 50 years? Let's have a look at what the obesity epidemic is like at the moment and what changes have occurred over a 50-year period here, because this is obviously an extremely common complaint. Well, we're talking about a 47% increase that's occurred over a 50-year period. Huge, but can I just point out, nothing like 10,000. If we look at sexually transmitted diseases, for instance, we're talking about over a 50-year period, 115% increase. Again, a huge increase over a 50-year period, but nothing like 10,000. If you look at the prison population, which we have continuous reports on in terms of its escalation and the problems within it, we're talking about 190% increase in the size of the prison population. And if you look at the diabetes epidemic, which is one of the most common pressing issues in terms of long-term general health care within the UK, we are talking about a 492% increase according to the British Heart Foundation. But I hope you can see this doesn't even begin to approximate to this 10,000% increase. Now, I'm going to be saying a lot about this in the actual two-day course, but what I want to briefly say about it here is I have absolutely no dispute that we live in a society where people are increasingly unhappy and increasingly are living meaningless lives. And I think there are very specific reasons for that. And I think that that is primarily what we're seeing the growth in. For some people, this will actually manifest itself in being unable to function. But what I do want to emphasize with this particular point is the individuals who can't function as a result of this are typically a relatively small proportion. Now, you might say, aren't you sort of twisting definitions here, Paul? And I would say, well, I don't think I am, because there is clear government guidance about treating the diagnosis of depression as being something which is quite plastic and flexible. For example, and for me, this was one of the most key turning points in this apparent epidemic in a mental health problem, which was in 2006, the government gave clear guidance to GPs that they should now be using a diagnosis of depression if people came along and presented with what was described as extreme unhappiness. Now, my difficulty with that is that I have no dispute with the fact that people are increasingly unhappy, that life is increasingly meaningless. Whether they should be receiving a diagnosis of depression on this, I think, is another issue. And one of the reasons why I've got particular concerns about it is because diagnoses, particularly of mental health problems, I think lead people to see their problems in a different way. I think there's a tendency much more for them to see their problems as basically things which they are the passive recipient of. And we see this in all the language that our clients often use to describe themselves and their situation. I still come across people who say, I'm seeing you because I've got depression, as if they caught it like a common cold, or alternatively that they caught a disease. And I think that does lead people to view themselves as being rather passive. I think that it also tends to mean that, not surprisingly, if you're going to start using words like depression within a medical framework, it's not surprising that you're going to get individuals who are going to be looking for primarily a medical intervention to deal with this. So I really wanted to flag this up, not to dispute the fact that actually we are living in a society where people basically are increasingly unhappy in a major way, and that in addition to that, their lives feel particularly and increasingly meaningless. But having said that, I would want to raise the issue about whether we ought to be calling this depression. The course that I'm running is called that for obvious reasons, because it's a common language that everyone can understand. But I guess that one of the things that I'll be wanting to explore with you on the day really are alternative ways of making sense of this. And maybe an alternative way of starting to use a language which, in my opinion, gives more respect to the client rather than simply treating them as the passive recipient of something that's come upon them. So we'll be spending a little bit of time on that. So the second key sort of issue that I wanted to raise really with you, oh, sorry, before I do that, actually, just to remind you that there are other folks around who actually are saying very similar things, that basically this concept or diagnosis of depression is a bit spurious. This one from Parker, that depression is a diagnosis that will remain a non-specific catch-all. And look at this tagline on here, driven by clever marketing. Because the reality is that whenever a diagnosis is put center stage, it means that you get a massive escalation in primarily medical interventions to try and address it. And that actually certain other things that are around which support this distress, this unhappiness, this lack of meaning, are not actually given center stage. And this particular statement from NICE itself said the most significant limitation of helping depressed people is with the concept of depression itself. Our view, this is NICE, the body that gives clear guidance on what is supported and acceptable treatments for a whole range of physical problems, say our view is it is too broad and heterogeneous a category and has limited validity. I'll just repeat that, has limited validity as the basis for effective treatment plans. So for any of you that are working in this particular field where you do a lot of your work determined by this as a diagnostic category, I hope those 2 days are going to give you an opportunity to basically rethink that and to think of an alternative way of framing it. So the second key issue that I wanted to raise had to do specifically with behavioral ideas, which are a component of the 2-day course that we're actually going to be looking at. There's one particular strategy within it, which some of you may be familiar with, called behavioral activation, but which some of you may not have come across before. What I think I wanted to do was to put this back, not center stage, but to, I think, give it more prominence than I think it is often receiving at the moment. I think basically people either are unaware of this as an intervention, or alternatively, they see it as a superficial, rather low level intervention for working with people who are suffering from low mood. And actually, I think the evidence for this says something quite different, really, which is that this is actually an intervention where you can get quite rapid changes for folks who come to us for help pretty quickly. So why does it actually produce quite rapid changes? Basically, because as a general rule of thumb, not just with behavioral activation, but with other types of intervention as well, where people are doing something rather than reflecting on it or talking about it, generally speaking, doing things tends to produce bigger shifts in mood. Now, I'm not trying to suggest here that doing things is the only solution, and equally not all types of doing have that particular effect. But I think that one of the advantages of using something like behavioral activation is it does give a big kickstart to the work that's being done. And I wanted to say a little bit about where I think, if you're helping folks who are depressed, where in fact you might use behavioral activation most effectively in terms of the rest of the therapeutic interventions you're going to be using, and how you might take that and integrate it in. I'm also going to say a little bit on the 2 days about the concepts of skill loss and satiation, and how they can actually create low mood, and some very simple solutions that actually make a difference. They're not panaceas, but they actually do make a difference for the better. And again, I think are very useful at addressing certain problems which I don't think are necessarily recognized in other parts of the literature, or not necessarily embedded into practice. For example, the work that I'll be taking you through on satiation shows a very clear relationship between boredom and low mood, and how you address issues of boredom, which I know at one level sounds very simple, but actually I don't know that many practitioners who would be automatically exploring boredom as a contributory factor to low mood. And if they did, the issue about what they do about it, we'll be spending some time on that. We'll also be looking at how to reduce avoidance and withdrawal by using what's called fixed schedule reinforcement. For those of you that were doing training with me recently on the introductory CBT course, will hopefully remember the concept of fixed schedule reinforcement, but I'll be saying a lot more about it, and also opening up and using it and demonstrating how you can overcome avoidance problems that folk actually have. And we'll also be looking at something called the PREMAC principle. One of the issues that I think is around in the CBT field at the moment is that there is a dominant emphasis on the cognitive elements of CBT, which are undoubtedly extremely effective and extremely powerful. But one of the things it's tended to mean is that well-established, well-researched, and frequently used behavioral strategies, which actually have been around for a lot longer, often end up taking a back seat. And I'll be talking about the PREMAC principle, which is not a new concept, but I'll be bringing it back to look at how you can integrate it and use it in your work in order to address low mood problems. I wanted to bring up the issue of long-term causes and client depression. I guess that anyone that's got a CBT background will be familiar with the idea that CBT has a tendency to prioritize the here and now, has a tendency to prioritize what is maintaining problems rather than potentially initiating them. But I'm also aware of the fact that some folks who have not got that background raise the inevitable question, I think, which is, shouldn't we be looking at the real issue here that's actually leading the individual to be depressed, rather than the factors in the here and now that make the difference? And is it important, or isn't it important, to look at underlying long-term causes of depression? Well, I'm going to sort of say yes and no, and I will be opening that up in more detail over the 2 days. But CBT does talk about what are called initiating and maintaining factors, sometimes called developmental and maintaining factors. In other words, if you actually have a look at, for instance, a developmental model produced by Judith Beck, specifically, in fact, related to the issue of depression, you will find within that particular model that a lot of attention is actually given to the factors that lead people to be vulnerable to becoming depressed, as she would call it. And the argument is that, in fact, although these should not be the priority areas to work with to begin with, there are certain types of problem, of which depression is one of them, where we really need to be addressing developmental factors as well as maintaining ones. Why is that? For the very simple reason that we can help people to produce big shifts as a result of addressing maintenance factors, but you will often find the individual is more prone to relapse subsequently if developmental factors aren't addressed as well. So I'll be opening that up in a bit more detail about what the practical implications are. We'll be going through some different techniques about which can be applied to both maintenance and also developmental factors in the 2 days. The other thing I've got to say about this is that, generally speaking, CBT would argue that although there may well be a role for addressing, initiating, and developmental factors in depression, they should never be addressed until after maintenance factors are being addressed. And that's got some implications for timing. And broadly speaking, in the literature supports the idea that if you are going to address developmental factors in depression, then basically they shouldn't be occurring until you've reached double figures in numbers of sessions. It's a bit, you know, the metaphor here is it would be crazy, for example, to decide that you want to do mountain walking, you've never done it before, and you decide you're going to start off with Everest first. Basically, you need to be starting off with your Lake District first before you move on to Everest. You deal with the easier stuff, which also, incidentally, can build up confidence more rapidly as a result. However, the caveat in this, if you've not already spotted it, is it's all dependent on how much time you've got. And I'll be saying a little bit more about that. So for those of you that actually are working within quite significant time constraints with clients, I think there's a really big issue here about what you're going to prioritize and in what order. And I'll say quite a bit about that. And also basically what works best in CBT for reducing relapse. And there's a lot of new work that's coming out on this, which I think is going to be interesting and valuable for you. So we'll be spending some time on that. CBT is full of a range of strategies, although, as I have often argued, I think that the underlying principles for practically all CBT strategies are identical. And I know that for those of you that have trained recently with me on the introductory course that I've run, you will no doubt not want me to bore you again and go over all the details of that. But broadly speaking, that whatever strategy we're actually using within this particular modality, it largely operates through the same sort of processes. But that doesn't mean to say there's not an enormous range of strategies that can be used. And I've got just basically a simple short list of some of the ones that are commonly used. And I want to say something about what you use when, both in terms of the order of therapy, and also about the types of problem that the individual who is depressed is trying to grapple with. So, for instance, you'll find out that the use of pie charts is particularly powerful and useful when you're working with individuals who have a tendency to feel very guilty, or alternatively, if you're working with depressed people who have a tendency to blame others all the time about things. And there's a specific technique here within pie charts that I'll try and highlight for you. Trial lawyer techniques, particularly good, I think, in antagonism situations. So if you have a client who is depressed and has a tendency to wish to play tug of war with you, then rather than seeing that as a deficit, this is actually a technique where this can be used and it can be an advantage for you. There's obviously other pros and cons and particular uses for each of these other techniques, and I will be basically taking you through those during the course of the 2 days. And thirdly, or fifthly, in fact, sorry, what has third wave CBT got to offer? Because obviously, there's been an enormous amount of work, particularly, I guess, in the last 15 to 20 years, about the use of third wave CBT, the use of ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, dialectical behavior therapy, compassion-focused therapy, and so on and so forth, all typically using the concept of mindfulness. And I just wanted to go through with you where I think the particular strengths lie with these particular approaches and what they've uniquely got to offer. So it's worth saying that Mark Williams' work on mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, a lot of people assume that this is identical to mindfulness. Can I point out that it's a specific adaptation of mindfulness? And I'll be taking you through how it's actually adapted and how it can be incorporated for folks who are depressed. And also, I think quite importantly, at what point it's at its greatest value. There's been an assumption around, largely led by the research literature, that for about 15 years, the primary value of mindfulness-based cognitive therapy is in preventing relapse. In other words, that it's not primarily there as a first-line treatment, but it's a preventative treatment to prevent subsequent relapse. I'll be taking you through some more recent research, which indicates that that might not actually be true, and that there are some key features that exist within it, which appear to be particularly powerful when people are going through a depressive episode. So I'll be taking you through that. We'll be looking at rumination-focused therapy. This does not look at the content of what people are thinking when they're depressed. This is more interesting in the way individuals think when they're depressed and the key role that's played by rumination. So whenever you've been working with someone with low mood, you will be often familiar with the fact that they will often turn things over in their head time and time and time and time again. And you'll also be familiar with the fact that such rumination tends to lower mood even further, rather than, which is what its aim is when the person's doing it, which is to try and solve problems. People ruminate in order to try and solve problems, typically, but the reality is it actually has the opposite effect. And I'll be taking you through a relatively recent development on rumination-focused therapy, just to show you how there are some very useful additional tools that are now being developed, which directly address this particular problem. Adrian Wells, for a period of 15 to 20 years now, has put all of his energies into developing metacognitive therapy. Basically, metacognitive therapy is about, putting it very crudely, it's about addressing beliefs that people have about their beliefs and their thinking. In other words, we all hold beliefs to varying degrees about our thoughts, so, and this crops up in all sorts of ways. But for instance, I might think to myself, or I might believe that if I can suppress certain thoughts I have, I can get rid of them. It's quite common to believe that thoughts have enormous power. In other words, if I think something bad, it means I'm a bad person, and so on and so forth. So we'll be looking at some of the latest developments that are around from Adrian's work in terms of using this aspect, which is about beliefs, in terms of how you can potentially use them with your clients. Finally, the other thing we'll be doing on the 2 days is looking at other new developments which interface with CBT, but which are not purely CBT based. So I'm going to be looking at some of the most recent work that's around about predictable client factors for response to treatment. Are you aware of what they are? Are you aware of, for instance, the fact that we've got increasingly good research which indicates those folks who are going to respond most rapidly to whatever treatment is actually being provided for them, and those who are going to respond more slowly? And I'll be taking you through that on the 2 days. There's some good work that's coming out now on adapting primarily CBT for working with what I was going to call them minority groups, but that's just not accurate, particularly obviously when we're talking about men here, but what would be fairly fair to describe as being socially excluded groups. Men are still a very difficult group to engage, and they're a particularly difficult group to engage over mental health problems. And it's one of the key reasons, not the only reason, but one of the key reasons why, if you look at something like suicide, which has strong associations with depression, it is still an overwhelmingly male behavior. So the whole issue about how you engage men and how you adapt the work that you're doing to work with them, I think is a really important idea, really. Otherwise, you're simply going to find that people are self-selecting that are coming through your door. And we'll also look at some of the key issues that crop up in terms of working with ethnic minorities, and where there are specific beliefs that individuals might have which contribute to their low mood. And we'll be looking at how you can actually address those. There is an absolute escalation in the number of distance-based interventions for people who are depressed at the moment. So we've got a lot of new computer distance learning programs for folk. There's a whole variety of ways in which video conferencing is being used, as well as phone therapy is being used. And I'll be taking you through what, in my opinion, are the strengths and weaknesses of these, along with the research that's currently being conducted on it. And finally, one of the big downsides, in my opinion, about the concept of depression is that it is based on the idea that individuals that we're working with, the focus of our attention needs to be their deficits. And I think one of the great things about positive psychotherapy and positive psychology that's grown up over the last 30 years is that it has given an increasing degree of emphasis to identifying clients' strengths and resources. And what I'll be doing is taking you through some of the latest ideas in therapy about how you can incorporate those personal resource elements into the CBT work that you're actually doing. And even if you're not a CBTer, I would hope that some of those elements could be incorporated into whatever work you're actually involved with. So folks, I hope that's provided some food for thought. I hope it's provided you with some stimulation, but obviously above anything else, I hope it encourages you to think that you'd like to learn more, and would encourage you to sign up for the course when it occurs on the 28th of Feb. And look forward to seeing you there. So I'll pass you back to Julia, and I don't know if there's any questions that have come up from that, but I'm more than happy to answer them. Over to you, Julia.
Thank you, Paul. I suggest you stop sharing the screen, yep, so we can see you on a slightly larger screen. Thank you very much. My question to you first, are you sure you can manage in 2 days? Because the amount of new stuff you're going to cover actually surprised me. Do you think 2 days is enough?
Can I just say, to make maybe what I hope is an obvious point, we're going to be spending far more time on some stuff than others. So yes, there's no worry with that. For me, my primary focus is going to be giving practice opportunities and skill demonstration, but we will be touching on all of those particular elements. I do accept that some of those individuals might wish to go into more detail, and I'm quite happy to signpost people on that. But yes, we will be. We will be. Don't worry.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I've got a couple of technical questions from people about the course. The first question, although the course is part of the Master Practitioner Diploma in CBT, if you are not doing the whole diploma, you still can sign up to the course. You don't have to be a diploma student to do the course. Each of our modules of the diploma are designed in such a way that you can attend it as a standalone course on the particular topic. So that's the first thing. The second thing, I had a question from people who have already done depression with us in the past. You should have received an email from me a few days ago, which gives you a 75% discount. So you can buy the 2-day course for a quarter of a price. This is the better option rather than just doing a 1-hour tutorial, because as you can see, Paul is covering a lot of new stuff, and 1-hour tutorial will not give you that much more than SDS Thursday. So we felt that if you've already done a 1-day depression course with us, you pay only 25% of the price, and for that you can attend a 2-day course. If you haven't received that email, but you know you've done depression with us, please write to the office. It's info@sds-seminars.com, info@sds-seminars.com, and Mike, my colleague, he's got the link to this discounted price, and he will forward it to you, and you'll be able to book at this discount. And thirdly, the current discount for everyone else who haven't done depression with us, we've got £55 off the full price, and I have put the link in your chat box. Just click on that link and you will get to the page where you can book with that discount. So that's about booking of the course. Somebody also asked whether they will have access to today's recording. Yes, you can have access to all our recordings on our YouTube channel, and I will put the link onto the YouTube channel right here. And we actually had quite a lot of topics on some of the things, quite a lot of videos on some of the things which Paul briefly mentioned today, some MBCT exercises and things like that. So do go and have a look at our YouTube channel. Let me have a quick look if there are any questions. Is the course online too? If you can't attend the course live on the 28th and 1st of March, 28th February, 1st of March, I suggest you still book it now, because it will be the best price you can book it at. And then you can watch it as a recording and return to it, rather than not booking it and hoping to book it as a recording later. That will be at a higher price. That would be at the full price. So it's better to book it now and watch it later. Yeah, the same question about not being able to make the course. Can the course credit from the 2-day course be used as a top-up for extended accreditation for the CBT certificate course I've already done for children and adolescents? Yes, it can. If you've done a certificate with us and your accreditation runs out, carrying on training in CBT with us will extend that certificate. Yes, absolutely. There's lots of thanks, Paul. I can't see any other questions. If anybody wants just to put their hand up and unmute themselves and ask a question themselves, please feel free. We can probably take 1 or 2. David, please.
Yeah, so Paul, thanks. Paul and Julia, thanks. A clear linkage between low mood, depression and addiction, and the propagation of the addiction on I guess, an ongoing basis.
Yeah, I mean, the brief answer is yes, there's a two-way relationship between the two. And what I would simply say is that by definition, if I am depressed, I will look around at anything that looks like it will regulate or alter my mood. And that is on the whole what the substances that people get addicted to do. The difficulty, of course, is that the effects aren't long lasting. So what you actually end up with is a short-term effect, but a long-term price. And then, of course, it operates the other way around in the sense that, you know, if I have a pre-existing addiction, It obviously has a massive impact on my perception, my self-efficacy, my self-esteem, and so on and so forth. And therefore, it tends to then contribute to low mood problems as a result. So yeah, it's a two-way relationship that exists, and it's not surprising to find that. Well, actually, I'll go further than that and say that I think that one of the things that's really important to do whenever we're working with someone who's presenting with low mood is that we should be looking at what it is that they're already trying to regulate their mood with, which might be prescribed, it might be illicit, it might be legal, but not necessarily good for them. And the one area where, to be honest with you, I still don't find it's addressed on a regular basis is, and again, it's very common amongst people who are depressed, is the use of over-the-counter medications. And particularly analgesics, but yeah, there's a two-way relationship between undoubtedly addiction dependence and depression and low mood. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, David. Excellent question. I can see Franca has her hand up. Please go ahead, Franca.
Yeah, I was just wondering, on your website, there is a course, evidence reading, working with depression. Can you say a bit more about that?
Yes, we at each course, which is a module of Master Practitioner Diploma, is accompanied by a reading list, which you need to read through yourself and then pass the test, which shows that you've done the reading. You don't have to do that if you are booking the course just on its own, but if you want it to work towards the Master Practitioner Diploma, you need to do evidence reading as well.
Okay, lovely, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, well, I think we will try to finish on time today because it's an afternoon and you're probably on the lunch break and need to have a cup of tea. So thank you very much for coming. And I hope I'll see you on the 28th of February at Paul's 2-day course on depression. If not, still come to our Thursdays. You can find all the details about them on SDS website in the news item. So thank you very much. Thank you very much, Paul. That was fascinating. And you can unmute yourself, say your goodbyes and thanks, and we'll see you soon. Thank you. Bye.
Very much.
Bye.
Bye.
Look after yourselves.
Bye.
Look after yourselves. Take care.
Bye.
Take care.
Good
Thank
to see
you.
you
Thank
all.
you very much. Bye.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Have a good day, everyone.
Bye.
Take
Thank
care.
you. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.